All right. Thank you very much for tuning in to this session of Indigenous Trauma Liberation Certification Information Session. We are super excited, pumped, beyond honored and privileged to share with you this indigenously created, owned, and operated Indigenous Trauma Opportunity Professional Development Certification, whatever you want to call it. This is what we're doing. We are excited, and we are ready to rock and roll. And I know that so many teachers and so many people working with Indigenous children are excited about this opportunity. We've got messages. All of us here that have been a part of this have been getting messages about what's going on, what is it, and what we're going to do. We're super excited about this, and I'm just going to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves, tell us who you are and where you're coming from, and then we'll jump right into what we're doing here for the certificate. So I'm gonna push that over right now to Robin Morin.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robin Morin, for those that don't know me. My bloodline comes from Beaver Lake First Nation. My late Cookham is from Beaver Lake, and my late Chaplain was from Beaver Lake as well, too. My mother is from Saddle Lake First Nation, and I was born in Edmonton, Alberta. And I've lived in Treaty 4 territory for well over 25 years. My biological father is white, and I have no connection with that paternal side of my family. I was blessed to be adopted by Lake Mike Panay from Peekski's First Nation as a teenager. And I was able to grow up with the Bellegarde Panay family in the File Hills area. Identify as Naheo Esqueo as I ground myself in ceremony, protocols and teachings I've received throughout my life. I take it as a responsibility to pass those on to others as well. And I was very fortunate enough to raise my son in ceremony as well, too. So currently I'm a provisionally registered psychologist, and I work at First Nations University of Canada, where I provide one-to-one counseling supports, psychoeducation on various topics, and I will be providing psychoeducational assessments through the university as well. I also provide one-to-one counseling services to children, adolescents, and adults in various First Nations communities, as well as conducting psychoeducational assessments for on-reserve schools. I braid together Indigenous ways of healing with Western therapeutic practices. I really love what I do, and I learn so much from the people that I sit with, whether it's in therapy, whether it's in group sessions, whether it's in ceremony, whether it's in these opportunities, where we get to connect and discuss. You can always learn something from someone. So much of my training and research focuses on trauma, and I always try to approach anybody, whether it's in therapy or whether it's with a student that I'm doing an assessment with, whether it's somebody in the general public when I'm out at powwows, or even just within my family. I try my best to always have a trauma-sensitive, informed approach. So the module that I will be facilitating is Indigenous Perspectives of Trauma and Western Perspectives of Trauma. I want to start off by saying that this training is not going to heal your trauma or give you the therapeutic training that you need to heal or support others through their trauma. This training is meant to give you information for you to better understand what trauma is, how it impacts individuals, specifically learning for children, adolescents, and adults. So this training is meant to give you information for you to better understand that, and then also to how to provide support to either the students that you are working with, co-workers, family, and with yourself as well, too. The Indigenous Perspectives of Trauma module, I was very strategic to start with this module first, with this presentation, because I really wanted to allow time for the assignments. The assignment will involve self-reflection activities so that you can gain a better understanding of your patterns of behaviors, possibly how you manage those behaviors, and really start to create a toolbox. We all have strategies, and what's really powerful is when we implement, utilize our strategies, but also gather and use other ones, because they're not, the same strategies aren't always going to work. It's important for us to become aware of our own patterns of behaviors. And there is a Cree word, nahasawin, which translates to finely tuned awareness or perception. It's important to become skilled in nahasawin, because then we are aware of our own internal experiences or perceptions. And therefore, it informs us of how we react or how we're affected by other people's behaviors, because it's ineffective to meet a dysregulated child or adult when we are in a dysregulated state. So Nahasawin assists in providing self-management strategies to ourselves in those moments. Some of the topics that will be covered in this presentation is historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, multi-generational trauma, racial trauma, colonization, vicarious trauma, and grief and loss trauma right now, especially with the pandemic and how it is really affecting us as Indigenous people. There'll be other topics discussed in that presentation as well. The Western perspectives of trauma, I'll definitely define trauma from a clinical perspective, and we'll also cover the diagnoses that are out there within the field of psychology. So post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and developmental trauma, which is in the works of gathering data so that it can be implemented into the DSM. I'm going to briefly cover adverse childhood experiences, and then go into how all of these different types of trauma, Indigenous perspectives, Western perspectives, impact student learning. And so we'll go through the cognitive impacts, behavioral impacts, and some of the somatic experiences that students and adults experience when they are living in their nervous system and reacting from unresolved trauma. There'll be opportunities to connect with other individuals, as we'll have breakout groups virtually to discuss the content and allow for reflection, and also to learn from each other. So I will also be available for debriefing, and we'll always start the sessions with that reminder. Discussing, reflecting on, and becoming aware of our trauma or possible unresolved trauma can be very difficult. And so it's important to remember that in this training, I am here, we are here for each other, and we have no intentions. I have no intentions of leaving you vulnerable. So I just want to ensure that that everybody is aware that if there is times throughout the training where you are triggered, I will definitely make myself available to have a discussion on it. So that is what I'll be doing, and I'm super excited about the training, and I hope that everybody is excited about it as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tamara Albert. I'm Cree, Michif, and Polish, and my family comes from the Muskeg Lake Cree First Nation, also Red River Settlement, and Poland, which when my family came from Poland, they came and lived in the Fish Creek area. So for me, I've been a social worker for 20 years. I'm also an educator with a BEd from SUNTEP, and more recently I have a master's in social work. So being raised spending more time with my Polish side of my family that was steeped with language, culture, and spirituality, it really gave me an appreciation for that. My experience as a Cree Michif person, my family had loss of status, dislocation from land and language and ways of knowing, being, and doing. So that was kind of an area of growth that needed to happen for me. So I believe truly that when we don't know who we are as Indigenous people, that we believe what other people say about us. So for me, my journey kind of started when I went to First Nations University as a young person. And I became exposed to that remembering of what it is to have Indigenous epistemology present, and the realization that there was a connection in my family, that even though lots of that there had been that disconnection, just in the ways of our being, that it was present. So attending an institution like First Nations University that is steeped in Indigenous epistemology and pedagogy created a feeling of coming home for me. So through relationship, language, land, and ceremony, it set the foundation that I needed for a social work career. Just being exposed to traditional teachings and utilizing our ways of helping people and being co-taught with elders was huge. So working in the field of social work in various capacities with youth, in a trauma-informed lens. So the way I view it as Indigenous social work is naturally trauma-informed. And so for most of my journey as a social worker, I worked in preventative services and then went into the school system as more of a support staff. So I worked in lots of different projects that created space for students, exposing them to land-based, art-based programming, and seeing the change in our most high-risk youth. So then after a while, I went back to school and trained at SUNTEP, and again experienced an institution that embodied trauma-informed approaches. And it also gave me the opportunity to look at my Michif family history. And so for me, that was something that I had always struggled with. Just being Métis historically has stigmas, and lots of people, you know, if you were white passing, you did that. And that wasn't for me, like in the sense that I identified more with my Cree background, but being in that institution and researching all of my family and finding out all these crazy things about my family, it just rewrote the script for me. So I have relatives that died in the Battle of Duck Lake. And we were relocated several times, like from the Red River, the Turtle Mountains, and Duck Lake area. So for me, that's kind of continued to inform my practice of what I have always thought and what I learned as a young child, and my relationship with my grandmothers is that it is important for us to know who we are and where we come from, and that's a lifelong journey. So in my module, I'm looking more at trauma-informed approaches for teachers in the classroom setting and in the school environment. So on day one, we'll be focusing on Indigenous and Western theory. So we'll be looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which really comes from the Blackfoot perspective on needs. It kind of highlights the focus of lifelong work to come to self-actualization. So that's the big takeaway from day one. Like, as I said, we'll be looking at those Western and Indigenous theories, as well as the pillars of trauma-informed approaches, and knowing that this approach includes you. So for me, when you complete social work training, you come to know that in this education that you are a part of the people that you work with and do work with, and that you are not like that you come with those biases, and it's important to be reflective of your work and be as be non-judgmental, and constantly be unpacking those biases. So that's kind of what we'll be focusing on there with self awareness, getting the teachers to look at their own history, lived experiences, education, and what you bring, in your classrooms with you. So it is to become self-aware, continue to reflect, work effectively with traumatized children, youth, and families. Without this so that you're not getting thrown into your own trauma response. So I have a lot of activities planned. So we're going to be exploring things about ourselves that we might not have known. We're going to have lots of fun. Also, I'm so happy too that we're going to have breakout rooms like Robin talked about. So you guys will have a chance to not only just listen to me, but interact with each other. In day 2, we're going to be looking at, continue to look at Indigenous and Western perspectives and the works of Bruce Perry and Michael Yellowbird. So participants will learn about the principles of safe and healing environments. We'll touch on the Wagotoan teachings and how they are the same as mainstream principles for safe and healing environments. So participants will see the examples of having a trauma-informed classroom space, and as well some examples of some lesson plans. And throughout this model, we'll learn how we can be more responsive and assist in several pathways of resiliency building for our students. We will examine the school environment and how every single person working within that environment has the ability to affect a school setting. So if we're really looking at a full trauma-informed school, we'll be examining some of the elements that are suggested for having trauma-informed systems, as well as going over strategies and best practices that can be implemented school-wide. And that's it for me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Tatusis. I'm from Stunning Buffalo, Dakota Nation. My background is in education. I have a bachelor degree in Indigenous education and a Master of Educational Psychology degree. So I taught in a First Nations community school for several years. My background also includes offering specialized education services in the area of behavior and learning needs. I'm a psychotherapist at the Wellness Wheel Medical Clinic and focus specifically on Indigenous communities and clients. That's just a little bit of what I do and a little bit about myself. So when Chris first contacted me with this idea and he approached all of us with this wonderful, amazing idea, I immediately said yes, because this is exactly the type of training that I wished I would have had when I was teaching. So a lot of the years that I've spent in the classroom, there's a process to accessing supports for students when it comes to mental health or behavior needs or learning needs. So we follow, as teachers, we follow that process. And many times the process takes us to the end, which is a waiting list. So we have students that are on waiting lists to access second level support services or service providers for the area that the student needs supported. So what happens during that time is that teachers are expected to manage the situation and just wait for the services to become available. So that was always my struggle when I was teaching. I felt like I needed more tools in my toolkit. I felt like I needed the strategies to support my students because they were having a hard time. So that was something that was very challenging for me as a teacher. That's why I decided to go back to university for my master's degree in educational psychology. I took night classes and I would teach the next day, but I found it really beneficial because I would be able to use the strategies and the methods to support my students. So that's what I am excited about. I'm looking forward to this because we have the information and we want to give it out to the teachers. This is exactly what teachers need. And this is exactly what I needed when I was teaching. So this type of training wasn't available back when I was teaching, so I would have just jumped at this opportunity. Our team recognizes that the education support system is failing our children because of the gaps in the system. So due to colonialism, genocide, our people have been left with trauma, which we could identify within ourselves. We see it in the classroom, and we need to develop the skills and create a toolbox for our students. It sounds like a lot, but this is really what teachers are faced with on a daily basis. Teachers have to be given the tools to become trauma-informed. Once they're trauma-informed, then they can become respectfully trauma-responsive. So I'll just go right into what my module is about. So I will be teaching methodologies and strategies to support students through trauma. Participants will become aware of supports, methods, and strategies that are compatible with their own individual values and preferences. Teachers all have their own teaching style. So for that reason, we say that certain strategies and methods will not be compatible with their teaching style. That's why we're providing a lot of solutions here, a lot of resources, a lot of methods and strategies for teachers to choose from. Also, the strategies and methods it's not just, one method, one strategy works for all students. They're all unique individuals. So that's what we took into consideration when we were planning this. We will go into the adverse childhood experiences and how it relates to Indigenous students. Robin touches up a bit on it in Module 1, so that's good. You'll have some knowledge of that when you get to Module 3, which is what I'm doing. Your assignments will be based on the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. You'll have 2 options. Option 1 is a personal position paper assignment, and option 2 is a reflection art piece. So it's the same topic, but you'll have the option to choose one or the other. We will discuss ethical considerations. Participants will be able to demonstrate appropriate respect for knowledge, insight, experience, cultural perspective, and values of their students. We will go through the methods, strategies, approaches, which could be used to assist educators in understanding students who are impacted by trauma, who are impacted by the ACEs. And many of the models that I selected and the strategies that I selected could easily be put into anchor charts for teachers. And they can be placed in the room. You can make lesson plans, unit plans out of the models and strategies that I chose. So I'll just list a few of the strategies that will be in the module. We will discuss the BLS, which is the basic listening sequence, and this focuses on attending behavior and empathy skills. So teachers will learn this and they can teach it to their students, which will help the group as a whole class to use their attending and empathy skills with one another. We'll go through the ABC method, which is teaching students to acknowledge their feelings, be with their feelings, have compassion for their feelings. We'll go through the 3 V's plus B. We'll discuss the Cartman drama triangle, and I will explain how it can be used as an effective practice for teachers. We will also discuss the importance of the postmodern approach, which operates on the premises that problems are identified within a cultural, social, and political context rather than solely existing within the individual. So we'll be covering a lot, but I really try to narrow it down I just thought about what teachers can use in the classroom, how they can apply it to a whole group or individuals. We will also discuss the importance of recognizing the thought distortions of students, which comes from CBT. We'll go into the cognitive behavior therapy strategies as well. We'll discuss indigenizing trauma-informed responsiveness, how to respond to a student or group in crisis. I'll give examples and non-examples. We will discuss strategies for engaging with families regarding student trauma or family trauma, how to use observation statements in confronting student behavior to promote positive solutions. I'll also discuss empathic confrontation to note discrepancies and feedback to students. And at the very end of the module, I'll go through the importance of educator self-care, because oftentimes educators leave that for last. And it's so important that teachers remember their self-care, because burnout happens way too often. So I'm just really excited about this program because it was designed and created by educators and experts in EdPsych. We see the gaps in the education system. We recognize the importance of becoming proactive in meeting the needs of the students. We are working to support educators in becoming trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. So I'm looking forward to this. This is something that's just wonderful. I wish I would have had this when I was teaching. And I'm just really happy to be part of this team. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much. That comes to me. So my name's Chris Scribe. I am, sorry, my phone is ringing and I need to stop that. So my name is Chris Scribe. Tansago Magantik. Chris Scribe Ntsigasan Kinaseo, CPU Chinia. How Kunabi, Tugahe Amani, Amachiabi, Hoga Wakpa, Gichitai Tai Hibi. I'm Nakota Cree, originally from, sorry, I got my kids just running around a little bit, so it's all good. We're working from home, everybody knows. So we are doing this trauma informed training, and why we did it is just from experience. I guess who I am is I'm Nakota Cree, originally from the Norway House Cree Nation, northern Manitoba, also from the Carry to Kettle, Nakota Oyate, and I grew up in Poundmaker Cree Nation. So I got ties to Treaty 4, Treaty 5, and Treaty 6, and really grateful for that. And, you know, we have within our understandings and the group that we have here, so much experience in working with Indigenous children. When I thought about creating this and bringing a team together to look at building a PD or a training or a certification, a bunch of things came up and a bunch of things came forward for what I wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. Is that this can't be one person's idea. It needs to be a collaboration of Indigenous people that have worked with Indigenous youth that have done amazing things already, and these ideas coming forward, and that's how this extension and this opportunity happened. For me, I'm not an ed psych, or I haven't taken the classes at the master's level. I am an educator, have a Bachelor of Education degree, have a Master's of Education in Educational Administration, and I am in the process of completing my PhD. The proposal defense is happening on February 1st, and I'm freaking out. That's coming up because I have to try and sort that out. But it's going to happen. So there ain't no hiding from it. It's going to come up. I've spent my teaching career teaching every grade from grade 2 to grade 12. You know, I've taught in a special needs setting, a behavior mod setting. I've been an acting principal. I've been a principal. And what I found was we are in positions when we're in the schools and we're working with Indigenous youth and children, we find ourselves in these positions that we are dealing with trauma on every level. We're trying to figure out how we do that, how we sort that out. Trauma from our students, trauma from our teachers, trauma in ourselves. How do we heal from that and figure out to deliver the best Indigenous education possible? And what I found was we can't unless we look at strategies to help ourselves heal, to identify the trauma that exists within our school systems, identify the trauma within ourselves, and have a toolkit that's going to help us as we approach these situations. Now, in my experience as a classroom teacher, you deal with that in your classroom, and the kids are coming forward and they're bringing these stuff and they're talking about them. And man, you know, like, a lot of times I used to sit at the end of the day and trying to write out my day plan for the coming up, when planning for the coming up assignments and the coming up activities. And I used to think, how the heck is this kid still coming to school and wanting to learn after what they've talked to me about? And I had no strategies. I had no training to deal with this. In my Bachelor of Education degree, I can remember I took 2 ed psych classes in all of my Bachelor of Ed degree, and it was on assessment. And then there was one on students with special needs and trying to figure out what that means. So it's my tiny one here is little baby's over. So I was trying to figure out how to do this with very little training and just kind of on the fly. And I was super lucky that I grew up with some Jedi master social workers as an auntie and an uncle that lived right next door to me in Palmaker. And I want to give them a shout out, my late uncle Kristen Tatusis and my auntie Kimberly Tatusis. You know, by way of just being around them, gave me a little bit of insight into, you know, knowing that I can't take this all on myself, that I had to find and look at different ways that we can go forward and find the people to help move this, help us with our students. And it was such a tough scenario for as a teacher and as a and then it was multiplied when I took on an administrative role as a principal. It was multiplied. And the biggest tool and the strongest way that I was able to address these was through culture, language, and Indigenous ways of knowing. What I found was when I would utilize our Indigenous ways of knowing, our stories, our culture, and our language revitalization, and I took the kids out on the land, it was like a switch in these kids' brains, like the blood memory of who they are was all of a sudden utilizing the land to help them heal. And I mean, you have to be in those scenarios to kind of witness this, take a step back and look at it, forget the objectives, the outcomes, and the indicators for it, and just witness what's happening with these students when you take them out on the land. And when I was doing that, it opened my eyes to know that this is one of the answers for this. So when we're developing this, it was important that we understood that we had the knowledge from Western understandings of trauma-informed practice and training, that we can't ignore that those systems, we can't just ignore them and say, you know, they're non-Indigenous, so they're no good. We need to utilize that because there's a lot of research there. There's a lot of skill there. There's effective things, how the brain works, and all of these Western ideas of trauma and informed practices, they're valuable for our kids. But the foundation of what we do needs to be Indigenous. So each one of us brings that Indigenous foundation as we move forward, understanding and valuing the knowledge that comes forward from a Western ideology. Now, that being said, my module is 100% land, language, and culture, understanding that this is the tools in which we move forward. So when I looked at it, I said, okay, we need to know and understand that how do we build this and how do we develop it in a powerful way that brings our kids to this, to be able to deal with, or our teachers to be able to identify that trauma exists. I grew up in a home that from my grandmother raised me, but she was dealing with the trauma from residential schools and that, you know, shitty ass education that existed at Brandon School. And I swore, and I don't care, but you know, that's what it was. It was a colonial education system that harmed her, harmed my family, and harmed everything and so many families that existed. So how do we move beyond that trauma? How do we identify that that's a real thing? And what I found was I've developed what I call the original Indigenous education model. So I say that I developed it, but I didn't. I don't own it. This is Indigenous knowledge. It's owned by all of us. I just put in my perspective in my thought process, and I created this panel of how we identify our Indigenous original education system in this sacred hoop kind of model of delivery, starting from before we're born, starting until we come into this earth, and all of the rules and all of the protocols that exist within our lives, all of those things, and identifying them and telling this is our original education system. And guess what? It doesn't exist in four walls in a classroom. It doesn't exist with bells. It doesn't exist at age groups. It doesn't exist on any of that. It exists in outside in the land. And guess what? There's no ceiling outside. The only connection that we have is when we look up, and the ceiling is the creator. And imagine if we're able to give that to our kids as we move forward from healing. So I'll go through that model. I'll talk about it. I'll explain why it was. And then I'll also explain how that model was damaged for our people because of colonization, because of residential schools, because of all of those things, and how that was damaged and how it's affecting us right now. We'll talk about that. And then we'll also look at one thing that I always do, and I didn't invent this word, but truth bombs. Truth bombs for our kids is a necessary component for the movement forward for everybody. The movement forward and the success. If a child cannot tell truth, does not feel safe to speak truth, if a child does not have the ability to come forward and know that if they say truth, they're not going to be sent to the principal's office, or they're not going to be sent a letter home, that we have to allow our children to be able to speak truth. And we also have to be able to be truthful with ourselves as educators. So how do we become truthful with ourselves? If we're dealing with trauma and we're carrying this big, heavy backpack around full of trauma, it's affecting our movement. It's affecting our ability to be the best that we can. If we're ignoring that truth and if we're not talking about it, then what's going to happen is we're not going to be able to move in the direction that we need to go. So we'll talk about how we allow children and that truth and that understanding about truth and how that comes forward through that Indigenous lens. We also, in the model that I've developed, we also look at Indigenous language as a strategy for trauma liberation. Throughout as an educator, there has been so many times that I've heard misogynistic comments, or I've heard children talk, negatively about our Indigenous mothers, our women. And that comes from a place of trauma. It comes from a place of patriarchy. It comes from a lot of really the things that have been put into our backpacks that are limiting the ability of our nationhood. And, what I found is that the best teacher to decolonize and to look at moving through to liberating us from our traumas is the ability to access and create and learn more of our Indigenous languages. I've said many times before, and I've talked about this in keynotes or presentations that I've done, is that idea in the Cree language, Chris Scribe Nitsigasin, a translation for Nitsigasin, we would say that, that means my name is, but it doesn't actually mean that. The literal translation of that, with the root word and understanding root words, building up into these bigger words, mitsi is your belly button. So it's Chris Scribe. I exist here on earth because a mother fed me through that umbilical cord. I exist here because that umbilical cord and that belly button is a connection to my ancestors. And it's because of our mothers and the strength of our mothers that I'm allowed to live and breathe and operate on this earth. So when I say that right there breaks down all of the patriarchy, the misogynistic comments. It breaks down all of those different things that contribute to the trauma as we move forward. And just that single word. And imagine if we start adding words and we're adding language. So we'll talk about how we do that in our classrooms, how we talk about these things, how we talk about the fact that for many Indigenous languages, that there's for Cree languages in particular, that there's no binary, there's no man, there's no woman in those. That how does that help and support our children that are dealing with the trauma of their lives and moving forward from that? So we'll break that down. We'll talk about it. We'll do it. And then the second day of the training, I really, really wanted to focus on one of the most amazing tools that Indigenous people across Turtle Island and across the world have within their nationhood, that have within their soul and their body, and that's storytelling. There is no doubt in my mind that the power of story has the ability to break down barriers. It has the ability to help us move forward through the most traumatic experiences. Stories are medicine for us. Stories have that ability to uplift us, has the ability to make us cry, to laugh, to get mad, to be happy, to be inspired. Stories have all of this amazing power that we don't utilize to its full potential, especially when we're thinking about what that is. And in particular, especially with COVID, especially with our realities of living and breathing as educators in schools, in our First Nation communities, our Indigenous communities, we deal with grief constantly. Grief is a big part of the trauma that we carry. The grief of the loss of language, the grief of loss of loved ones, the grief of loss of culture, all of those things contribute to who we are. And story helps us move through that as a really powerful pedagogy. It helps us move forward so that we can understand that. And that is not something new. Story is an Indigenous protocol for us to deal with the hardest things that we live in our lives. It is something that was given to us by the Creator because we're pitiful human beings. We can't carry everything. So the Creator gave us tools in order to cope with all of those things that we can't carry. And story is one of those tools. And we'll break that down. We'll look at it, what it means, how we move forward in that, and we'll discuss that in the module. And looking at deep knowledge versus surface level knowledge, that iceberg, what that means. Like, we have all of these different things that our schools do, and it's above the iceberg. It's above. It's all the surface things that we see. It's putting a poster up of amazing, beautiful powwow dancers, and putting that's a surface level activity. The deep knowledge is understanding the stories behind those dances, understanding the protocols that created those places. So really understanding deep versus surface level knowledge and how that helps our kids regain identity. And that is where this work, that this module is focusing on: story, identity, reclaiming language, reclaiming who we are in our culture, and using the land as a resource for healing through trauma. So we'll break that down. We'll talk about what that means in working within an urban setting, within a rural setting, within a First Nation community, within a town community, working within all of those different spaces and places. And we'll break it down that way. So that's that in a nutshell. I do want to just give the opportunity here for our instructors, and just kind of just give a little bit of a chance to just kind of say, Robin said it really good when she talked about this trauma-informed training. This isn't going to save your life. There's no training that's going to be the be-all, end-all to make you, to do everything for you. That's impossible. All we're doing and all we're providing is a spark for you to understand a little bit more, to build the fire that's going to do the work. That's all this is. We are providing as much as we can. And every single person here, Robin, Tatum, Kristen, and myself, are going to give everything we have to ensure that this is a quality and meaningful and relevant to supporting Indigenous children, schools, staff, and whoever's working with Indigenous kids. We're going to give it all we got. But even if we give all we got, it's only ever going to be a spark that moves forward for you. And it's your job to take that and go and build a fire. Find the resources that are within your communities. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I wish I could lie and just say, like, you buy and you pay registration fee for our certification, and you're going to be trauma informed, and you're going to save the world. That ain't going to happen. That ain't going to happen. What we are going to do is that we're going to give the best that we have. We're going to give the best that we have for all of you. We're going to give what we have and the tools that we have. We're going to share them with them, because we all believe that this is what's necessary for our kids. And ultimately, that's all that matters. When we're all gone from this earth, and when we're no longer here and we rejoin our relatives, all we're going to have is our kids. All we're going to have is the ones that we leave behind to carry on. And if we're carrying trauma that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't liberated from, then we're gonna continue to suffer. And our nations need it, our children need it, and those not yet born need it. And I hope that this helps in some way. I hope that it creates some discussion, and I hope it creates some dialogue, and that people are interested in it. I do want to just kind of give another opportunity to all of our members here, just for some closing comments. We do have about 15 minutes. While they're doing some closing comments, if I look through the comment thread, I'll see if there's any questions in there, and then we'll give an opportunity to ask. So I just want to give some opportunity for closing comments. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to give this over to Robin to start us off with some of her closing comments.
So I guess what I have to add to what Chris said in regards to, we're giving you a lot of things to think about, because trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, trauma response is all a perspective. And, for this to have really great impact on our younger generations, it definitely will take a collective to do it. And so having a trauma-informed school is going to be very valuable. And I started off with the, saying that this isn't going to heal your trauma, because it's very true. As Indigenous people, we all have trauma, and I myself have trauma. As a psychologist who provides counseling, it's my responsibility to ensure that I am not causing harm with anybody that I sit with or work with. So I have to do my own trauma work. And it's hard, but it's liberating, because I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for me being active in my healing journey. And so I don't want anybody to, be scared or, not to think that this isn't beneficial, because everybody will learn something, whether it wasn't through your education or experience. You should take away. You should be able to walk away with something. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Hi. So yeah, for me, what I was thinking about when I was developing this module is just the work that I've done, like for myself and my family. So being always living in Saskatoon, not having that connection to community, I had to build it myself. And I think, and the youth that I work with, that's a common story for them as well. So lots of what I've done for my own growth, attending ceremony, language has been huge. So that seed was planted for me when I started at First Nations University to take a Cree course. And probably for the last 5 years or so, that has been a huge focus for me, attending Cree camps. And within that also there is, I can see how in the language, what Chris was talking about, and Robin touched on it a bit too, is how we develop that connection to each other that has been forgotten or lost for some people. In the language, you're never alone. So I've learned that and had my own healing that's come from that. Also, I do art therapy and expressive arts. And so we will be doing lots of looking at some things that, touch in the cognitive symbolic levels for kids, perceptive and affective levels, and the sensory kinesthetic levels. So even though we're like in a group setting as teachers, we're able to do some of that work that provides that self-regulation and co-regulation with teachers. So that's just what I thought about too. There's assignments. I had been a part of this at Suntap where we did like mapping, story mapping, that our own history of mapping. And I know this can be triggering sometimes for students, people, for me myself. And I worked with a colleague that Belinda Daniels that also did this with her students, and it was connected to some work that Christy Belcourt did about renaming land and things like that. And this assignment that I also did in Suntap was like so liberating for me of how I thought of myself as an Métis person. I found out like in my I have volunteer relatives that my relatives hosted the meeting that wrote the letter to have Louis Riel come to fight. Like what a change in story, that I would have never known that. I just actually found that out about 2 months ago doing some research with my auntie. So there's lots of things written about my family in books that I don't even know and didn't even have that connection because of that dislocation. And so I think it's so important for us, even though it may be hard. So for example, when I did the mapping assignment with some students, you know, if students were really uncomfortable in that piece, we just adjusted things. So nothing's set in stone so that it's relevant. So for me, that's what I'm bringing to this module is my own work and things that I have found helpful. Lots of times kids don't have words when they're experiencing trauma. So that's why exposure to land, language, art, all those things helps process that trauma. And like I mentioned, Michael Yellowbird speaks lots of that about ceremony, and how ceremony, drumming, things that we have always done and obviously always known as Indigenous people, storytelling, and how that actually rewires our brain and starts that healing of that trauma. So yeah, so that's what I just wanted to, I had forgotten to talk about it in when I first talked. So this is a great opportunity to be able to speak to that. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so in closing, I just wanted to add that I like what Chris said about the liberation aspect of it. So the goal is to assist teachers and students in having the ability to re-story their life story. So what that means is assisting teachers and students with the ability to see their story through a different lens, to take a look at their story through the lens of liberation rather than surviving it. That's the ultimate goal for me. I don't usually share a lot about myself. I'm a very low-key person. I like to keep my private life very private, but what I would like to share today is I was one of those students. I grew up with my grandma raised me. She was going through her own trauma. She was trying to work through it as she was raising me and my siblings and my cousins. She did a wonderful job. I'm grateful that she did the best that she could do. But these students that I see that struggle with trauma in their homes or in their background, that really touches my heart because I was one of those students. I was one of the students that I didn't show up to class a lot of times. I had a lot on my plate for a child. I had a lot of responsibility. I know what it's like to have the hardships of the students that are struggling. So that's why I'm really passionate about this program, this certification program. I'm really glad to be a part of it. That's all. I'd like to thank you all for joining us and spending some time with us. It's really meaningful to me, and I hope everybody has a good day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the comments and thank you for the views. Do share. This video is going to be saved on the Think Indigenous online education Facebook page. We'll figure out how we share that onto our Instagram and page as well. So it will be here. If somebody didn't get a chance to see it or is asking questions, we'll leave this up here for everybody as well so that they can watch it later. We're also just some logistical pieces. We have scheduled with the tribal council right now. We are going to be delivering the ITLC to a tribal council. So that's already in the works. We're already doing that. So the pilot, or I guess if you want to call it that, is going to be going forward. We're also going to open up a open registration for anybody that's interested in. And people have been asking me, is this for non-Indigenous people? If you're working with Indigenous children and you're ready for truth, this is for you. By all means, like, we have so many of our non-Indigenous allies that are doing such amazing work, and we want you to be a part of it as well. It is Indigenous focused. It does come with Indigenous ways of knowing. You're not going to turn Indigenous after you take this. So so don't worry about that. So you're still, but these are tools in order to support that. Do check on our website, www.thinkindigenous.ca. We are going to be putting that up. We wanted to release this first before anything went out live online, and we'll release those. There'll be limited seats because we don't want to have too huge of a group. We're not doing a cash grab of 300 people registering for our certificate, and then we all have our next session in Cancun or something like that. So we want to make sure once COVID's over, but we do want to make sure that this is going to be open to any of our people, that anybody that wants to check it out. So with that, I just want to thank the team here for their dedication, the work that they've created, the modules that they've done. It is quality. It is real. It is got the stamp of approval from Think Indig. It's got truth all over it. It's got relevant delivery. I mean, like Kristen said, I wish that I could have taken this as well. And I wish that as a principal that this opportunity was there for me. And again, this isn't, you don't have to take this and not take any more trauma PD. This is only the spark. Go and take as much as you can. Get out there and learn as much as you can as you move forward. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate all of you, and do stay tuned to the Facebook page, to the website, and do support the work, and we appreciate that support as we move forward. Hi, kinana skumten pedamaya opala tanka. I'll see you guys later.